r/TIFU by exposing my freeloading uncle's lies at family dinner. Hashtag Chunk 1, The Discovery. The first sign that something was seriously wrong came at 2:47 a.m. on a Tuesday. I was heading downstairs for water when I heard it, the unmistakable sound of gunfire and explosions blasting through my childhood bedroom at full volume. My bedroom. The one Uncle Derek had been temporarily occupying for 8 months while he focused on his job search. I stood on the landing, listening to him yell at his gaming headset. Come on, come on. Push the objective, you dumbass. Then laughter, his laughter mixed with other voices through the headset. Party chat. At nearly 3 a.m. That was the first crack in the carefully constructed story my parents had been telling themselves. The second crack came 3 days later when I went to use the printer in Dad's office and found something I wasn't supposed to see. Mom had left her laptop open, and I caught a glimpse of her browser history before I could look away: how to get family to move out, setting boundaries with relatives, when to stop helping adult children. My stomach dropped. She knew. Or at least, she was starting to suspect. But here's the thing about my parents: they're the type who avoid confrontation like it's a communicable disease. Dad works in accounting, Mom's a nurse. They're practical people, but when it comes to family drama, they fold faster than origami. Uncle Derek was Dad's younger brother, the troubled one who'd bounced between jobs and couches for the last 15 years. When Derek showed up on our doorstep in February claiming he needed just a month or two to get back on his feet while job hunting, they couldn't say no. Family takes care of family. That's what my dad had always said. Except family shouldn't be a parasite. I was 24, fresh out of college with my business degree, job hunting myself but staying with my parents while I figured out next steps. I'd given up my bedroom without complaint. Derek needed a quiet space to work, and I could sleep in the guest room. No big deal. Temporary situation. Except temporary had stretched from February into October, and my parents were getting noticeably thinner, more tired, while Derek had somehow gained weight. The real proof came when I decided to do something I'm still not entirely proud of, but honestly, I don't regret it either. I was in the kitchen making coffee the next morning when I noticed Derek's laptop sitting on the dining room table, closed but still plugged in, with no one around. My heart started racing. I shouldn't. I absolutely should not. Privacy is important, and I knew that. But I also knew my parents were being played, and I was about to spend another evening listening to them worry about money while Derek lived off their generosity. I opened the laptop. It took maybe 10 seconds for Windows to wake up, and then I was in. Derek never password protected anything. Of course he didn't. His browser history was like a museum exhibit of deception. Dozens of gaming sites. Streaming platforms. Food delivery apps. YouTube videos titled Best Gaming Setups 2024 and Top 10 Esports Teams. No job listings. No LinkedIn history. Nothing. I clicked on his job applications folder, a shortcut right there on his desktop, probably something he created to fool my parents if they ever asked. Inside were 3 documents, all templates, all clearly never actually submitted anywhere, all dating from mid-February. 3 fake job applications created at the beginning of his job search, presumably to show my parents if they asked for proof. My hands were shaking. I dug deeper. His email was open in another tab. I scrolled through recent messages. Nothing job-related. But there were emails to his friends with screenshots attached, screenshots of what looked like conversations in Discord. I opened one. Asterisk, yo, Derek's got it made. Free room, free food, free everything. His parents are loaded. I'm telling you, just play it out a few more months. They're not suspicious. Asterisk. Derek's response, asterisk, dude, my brother is so gullible. I could literally live here forever if I wanted. My sister-in-law keeps making lasagna, lol. Living the dream, man. No bills, no responsibilities, just vibes. Asterisk. I felt something crack inside my chest. Living the dream. My parents had been eating less to make the grocery budget stretch. I'd overheard Dad on the phone with his boss asking about overtime. And Derek was telling his friends about the lasagna like my mom was a restaurant trying to impress him. The rage was cold and clean. It cut through any hesitation I might have had. I went back to my room and grabbed my phone. For the next hour, I systematically took screenshots. Everything. His browser history, his emails, his Discord conversations, his non-existent job applications. All of it. I sent them to myself and created a folder on my cloud drive, backing everything up. My hands were steady. My mind was clear. This was happening. My parents had always been the type to need evidence, to need facts before they'd believe something. They weren't people who could just accept I saw him gaming at 3 a.m. as proof enough. They'd ask questions. They'd find reasons to doubt. They'd want to see it in black and white before they'd accept that the brother my dad had been trying to help for 15 years had been lying to their faces. Well, I'd give them more evidence than they could possibly need. That afternoon, I stopped by a print shop downtown and printed everything. 23 pages of proof. Screenshots of emails, Discord conversations, empty job applications, browser histories showing nothing but games and streaming. I stapled them into a neat folder and hid it in my desk drawer. The family dinner was scheduled for Saturday. 8 days away. Thanksgiving was the one family event my Uncle Derek actually showed up for, which meant my extended family would be there, my aunt, my cousins, grandparents. They'd all know soon enough what a liar he was. Derek had no idea what was coming. Hashtag Chunk 2, the waiting game. The problem with planning revenge is that you have to live with it for 8 days before it happens. I tried to act normal. I failed spectacularly. That first day after printing everything, I couldn't look at Derek without seeing the Discord messages in my head. Living the dream, man. He came into the kitchen around noon, his typical wake-up time, wearing one of my dad's old t-shirts. When had he started doing that? And microwaved some of the leftover chili Mom had made for meal prep. He ate it standing at the counter, scrolling through his phone with one hand, not bothering to clean up the drips he left on the granite. Hey, he said absently, not even looking up. I grunted back, focusing intensely on my cereal like it was the most fascinating thing in the world. My jaw was so tight I thought I might crack a tooth. He didn't notice. That was the thing about Derek, he didn't notice much beyond his own immediate sphere. He finished eating, left his bowl in the sink, and shuffled back upstairs to my bedroom. I heard the telltale sound of his gaming setup booting up within 5 minutes. Mom came home from her nursing shift around 1 p.m., looking exhausted. She'd worked a double. I watched her move through the kitchen like she was moving through water, every motion heavy and deliberate. She opened the fridge, stared at the contents for a full 30 seconds without seeming to really see them, then closed it again. "Hey, sweetie," she said to me, pressing a kiss to the top of my head. "How was your morning?" "Fine," I said, and the lie felt enormous. I was sitting on a folder containing evidence that would blow up her Saturday night, and I was talking about the weather like it mattered. She microwaved some tea and sat down across from me, still in her scrubs. There was a dark stain near the collar that I suspected was blood. "Your father's working late again," she said. Something about quarterly reports. He was working late because Derek was bleeding the family finances dry. Dad was picking up extra hours because my uncle was choosing to stay unemployed. My mom was working doubles because they'd convinced themselves they could handle this temporarily, and temporary had metastasized into permanent. "I know," I said carefully. "He mentioned it." She nodded and sipped her tea. Her hands trembled slightly. They hadn't done that 6 months ago. The hardest part was not telling them. Not walking up to my parents that night and laying out everything I'd found, making them face it immediately. But I knew them. They would minimize it. They would make excuses. Dad would get defensive about his brother. Mom would worry about being too harsh. They'd give Derek a chance to explain, and he'd spin some story about how the Discord messages were jokes, how he'd been sending out applications through email they couldn't see, how he was actually this close to getting a job, but these things take time. They needed to see it. All of it. In front of witnesses. In front of the extended family who could back them up and validate their decision to finally put their foot down. By Wednesday, I was a mess. I couldn't sleep. I'd lie in the guest room staring at the ceiling, thinking about the moment. Imagining the looks on everyone's faces. Derek's face, when he realized he'd been caught. My parents' faces, when they finally accepted that the brother/son they'd been trying to save didn't want to be saved. But something else was gnawing at me too, something I didn't want to examine too closely. Derek had been living in my childhood bedroom for 8 months. My childhood bedroom. The room where I'd had my first kiss, awkwardly, with Sarah Chen from calculus, senior year, where I'd cried after getting rejected from 2 colleges, where I'd celebrated getting into the one that accepted me. That room was supposed to be mine, in some fundamental way, even after I left for college. It was the holding point of my younger self. And Derek had colonized it. He'd filled it with his mess and his entitlement and his lies. Thursday morning, I was making breakfast when Derek actually emerged before noon. This was unusual enough that I actually looked up. "Morning," he said, and he seemed almost cheerful. "Your mom said something about Thanksgiving dinner being tomorrow." My stomach did a flip. Tomorrow? No. Saturday. The dinner is Saturday. Saturday, I corrected. Right, Saturday. Cool. He grabbed a bowl and started pouring cereal with the casual confidence of someone who truly believed he'd be welcome at that table. "I'm excited, actually. Your mom's doing that thing with the turkey, right?" I stared at him. He had no idea. He was genuinely, innocently excited about Thanksgiving dinner, completely oblivious to the fact that it was going to be the worst day of his life. "Yeah," I heard myself say. "She's making turkey." He grinned at me, actually grinned, like we were friends, like we were bonding over the upcoming meal, and I felt something twist inside my chest that wasn't entirely anger. It was almost pity, which made me furious at myself. He didn't deserve my pity. "Dude, your family is the best," he said, and I almost threw up. After he disappeared back upstairs, I texted my best friend Marcus, *, "I'm doing this tomorrow. I'm really doing this, *. Marcus had been my sounding board through all of this. I'd shown him some of the screenshots late one night when I couldn't hold it in anymore. His response had been immediate and unequivocal: "Your uncle sounds like a dumpster fire and your parents need to know." But now, with less than 24 hours until the dinner, I was second-guessing everything. What if it backfired? What if my extended family sided with Derek? What if they thought I was being cruel? What if, and this was the thought that kept me up at night, what if exposing Derek this publicly made things worse for my parents? What if my aunt, Derek's mother, got angry at my parents for betraying family on Thanksgiving? What if it caused a huge family rift? Marcus called me that afternoon. "You're spiraling," he said without preamble. "I can hear it in your silence. You're spiraling. What if this makes it worse?" I said. "Worse than what?" "Then your uncle freeloading indefinitely. Then your parents working themselves to death. Then you not having your own bedroom in your parents' house." Put like that, it seemed obvious. But nothing felt obvious anymore. "He's still family," I said weakly. "So are your parents," Marcus shot back. "And they matter more. You know that." I did know it. I just wasn't sure I had the right to be the one to force the issue. But the folder was still in my desk drawer. The evidence was still there. And tomorrow, everything would change. Tomorrow, Derek's free ride ended. #Chunk 3, the morning of. I didn't sleep. Not really. I managed maybe 40 minutes around 4 a.m. before my brain kicked into overdrive again, running through every possible scenario like a stuck record. By 6 a.m., I gave up pretending and got out of bed. The house was quiet. That pre-dawn silence that only exists before everyone else wakes up, when the world feels like it belongs to you alone. I made coffee and sat at the kitchen table with my laptop, pulling up the folder one more time. I'd been over this material so many times I could probably recite the Discord messages from memory. * living the dream, man. These people are basically funding my entire existence, *. Dude, seriously, I haven't applied for a job in like 3 weeks. Why would I? Free rent, free food, free everything. I'm basically retired at 28 asterisk. Asterisk my brother-in-law keeps leaving me job listings. It's hilarious asterisk. The word hilarious hit different in the morning light. Not just cruel, but contemptuous. Derek didn't just think he was getting away with something, he thought my parents were stupid for believing him. He was laughing at them. I heard footsteps around 7 a.m. and nearly jumped out of my skin. But it was just Dad, shuffling into the kitchen in his robe. He looked like he'd aged 5 years since Derek arrived. "You're up early," he said, surprise evident in his voice. I quickly closed the laptop. Couldn't sleep. Too much caffeine yesterday. He nodded, accepting this without question, and started making his own coffee. We stood there in companionable silence for a few minutes, and I felt the weight of what I was about to do settle on my shoulders like a physical thing. Dad had no idea. In about 12 hours, his Thanksgiving would implode. His family dinner would become a confrontation. And I was the one lighting the fuse. "You okay?" Dad asked, studying me over his mug. "You seem tense." "Just nervous about the dinner," I said, which was technically true. "It'll be fine," he said, patting my shoulder. "Your mom's been cooking since yesterday. The turkey's going to be perfect. And it's nice, you know, having everyone together. Even Derek seems like he's in better spirits lately." Better spirits. Derek was in better spirits because he thought he'd successfully conned my entire family. He was relaxed and happy because he believed the gravy train would never end. I didn't say any of this. I just nodded and watched my dad shuffle back upstairs to wake my mom up so they could both get ready for the day ahead. By noon, the house had transformed. Mom had orchestrated a military-level operation. The turkey was in the oven, filling the house with that rich, golden smell that screams Thanksgiving. The dining room table was extended to its full length, covered with a tablecloth I'd forgotten we owned. Place cards were arranged in careful positions. Everything was clean. Everything was perfect. Derek emerged around 1 p.m., as predicted, and immediately tried to help. "What can I do?" he asked brightly, tying an apron around his waist like he was some kind of contributing member of the household. "You can set the table," Mom said, handing him a stack of napkins. I watched from the kitchen as he moved through the dining room with the ease of someone who belonged there. He was humming. Actually humming. My parents watched him work with expressions of cautious optimism, like maybe, just maybe, he was finally turning a corner. If only they knew. The folder was still in my desk drawer upstairs. I'd printed everything in color, added labels, organized it chronologically. It was thorough. It was damning. It was sitting 30 feet away, waiting. My aunt and uncle, Derek's parents, arrived around 3 p.m. with my cousins. Derek lit up when he saw them, hugging his mom like he hadn't seen her in months instead of just a few weeks. I watched her embrace him, completely unaware that her son had been mocking her generosity through Discord messages to strangers. My grandparents came next, followed by more cousins, more aunts, more uncles. The house filled with noise and movement and the kind of chaos that only happens when you cram 14 people into a space designed for 6. Around 4:30 p.m., while everyone was engaged in various conversations and appetizers, I went upstairs. My hands were shaking as I pulled the folder from my desk drawer. This was it. Once I did this, there was no taking it back. I went to the bathroom and locked the door, just to have a moment alone. My reflection in the mirror looked strange, pale, determined, angry, uncertain. I looked like someone about to blow up their own family. Was I doing the right thing? The thought hit me with unexpected force. Not the doubt, I'd been living with that for days, but the sudden understanding that I might be about to damage relationships that couldn't be repaired. Derek's relationship with my parents was already broken, yes, but what about my relationship with my aunt? With my cousins? Would they blame me for publicly humiliating their family member? There was a knock on the bathroom door. "You've been in there for 10 minutes, Mom called through. Are you okay?" "Fine." I called back, too brightly. "Just be right out." I took a breath. Then another. Marcus's words came back to me, asterisk they matter more. You know that, asterisk. He was right. Derek had had 8 months to change. 8 months to be honest, to actually job hunt, to appreciate what my parents were giving him. Instead, he'd spent that time lying and mocking them. I unlocked the bathroom door and walked downstairs, the folder clutched in my hand. Dinner would be served in about 30 minutes. My extended family was in various states of relaxation. Dad was showing my uncle something on his phone, Mom was stress testing the turkey, my cousins were arguing about something with the easy familiarity of people who'd been bickering their entire lives. Derek was in the living room, helping my grandpa find a specific football game on the TV. He looked happy. Content. Like everything in his world was exactly as it should be. I went to my room and set the folder on my desk. I didn't open it again. I didn't need to. In less than an hour, everything would change. Hashtag chunk 4, the unraveling. The turkey came out of the oven at 5:15 p.m., golden and perfect, and Mom made everyone come into the kitchen to admire it like it was a newborn baby. Derek was there too, genuinely congratulating her on her cooking skills, and something in my chest twisted. He was good at this, at seeming grateful, at playing the part of the reformed nephew who was slowly getting his life together. It was an Oscar-worthy performance. 20 minutes until we eat, Mom announced, wiping her hands on a towel. Everyone go grab your seats. We're doing this family style, so just load up and pass things around. The dining room had transformed into something from a magazine spread. The extended table gleamed under the chandelier. Candles flickered in the center. Mom had actually brought out the good china, the stuff we only used for holidays that mattered. 14 place settings, each one perfect. It was almost obscene, how much care she put into making this meal special. I took my assigned seat, third from the left, between my cousin Jamie and my dad. The folder felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds in my lap. I brought it downstairs hidden under a magazine, which felt cowardly and strategic in equal measure. Derek sat across from me, 2 seats down, right next to Grandpa. He was already reaching for the basket of rolls before anyone had even sat down, utterly at ease. My aunt was on his other side, and she kept smiling at him like she was so proud of him for just existing at a dinner table. Everyone settled in. Dad stood to carve the turkey. Mom brought out the stuffing. Grandpa launched into his pre-meal speech about gratitude and family, the same one he gives every year, the one that usually makes my mom tear up a little because she's sentimental about these things. Derek listened respectfully, his head slightly bowed. A perfect picture of humility. I felt sick. Before we dig in, Dad said, once Grandpa had finished and everyone had started loading their plates, I want to say something. My stomach dropped. Asterisk, oh God, is he going to do it for me? Is he, asterisk? But no. He was just going to thank Mom for cooking. The words washed over me without really registering. I was too busy watching Derek butter a roll, completely unaware that his world was about to collapse. And I'm really proud of Derek for being here with us, Dad continued, and I felt like I might actually vomit. It means a lot. Family means a lot. We want to support you, buddy. You know that, right? Derek looked up, and his expression was almost humble. Genuine. I know, Uncle Joe, he said. And I'm really grateful. I mean it. The lie came out so smoothly. So naturally. Like he'd rehearsed it. You're going to get back on your feet, Dad said, raising his glass slightly. I know it. You're a smart kid. A little lost right now, but you'll figure it out. To Derek, Grandpa added, raising his glass. To Derek, everyone chorused. Everyone except me. I sat there with my glass untouched, watching my father toast the man who was laughing at him behind closed doors. The folder in my lap felt like it was radiating heat. How much longer was I supposed to sit here and pretend everything was normal? How much longer was I supposed to listen to my family celebrate someone who didn't deserve their respect? You okay? Jamie whispered, nudging me. You look like you're about to pass out. I'm fine, I lied. Dinner continued. There was conversation, the usual family dinner noise. My uncle, Derek's dad, was telling a story about a coworker. My cousins were debating whether the Eagles had any chance this season. Mom kept fussing over the food, making sure everyone had enough, that nobody's plate was empty for more than 30 seconds. Derek participated in all of it. He laughed at jokes. He asked my cousins about school. He complimented the gravy. He was so good at lying. About 40 minutes in, around 6 p.m., things started to get complicated in a way I hadn't anticipated. My aunt, Derek's mom, brought up his job search. Have you heard back from any of those places you applied to? She asked, butter on her chin, genuine hope in her voice. That tech company. And what was the other one? Derek didn't even hesitate. Still waiting to hear back, he said smoothly. The process is longer than I expected. Lots of rounds of interviews. But I've got a few promising leads. Leads, he said it like he'd actually been doing something for the past 8 months. My dad nodded approvingly. That's good, Derek. That's the right attitude. These things take time. And that was when something inside me broke a little. Not broke in the sense of collapsing. More like, snapped. Like a rubber band that had been stretched too far. I'd been sitting with this information for weeks. Weeks of watching Derek lie. Weeks of listening to my parents defend him, believe in him, support him, while he mocked them in Discord messages to strangers. And here we were at Thanksgiving dinner, my favorite holiday, the one my mom had been planning since September, and Derek was sitting at this table, eating this food, accepting the toast my dad had given him, all while being a complete fraud. I stood up. Everyone looked at me. Forks paused mid-air. Conversations died mid-sentence. I need to say something, I said, my voice sounding strange and hollow in my own ears. Honey, we're eating, Mom said gently, like maybe I was about to announce something that could have waited until dessert. No, I said. I need to say it now. The folder was in my hands. I don't remember pulling it from my lap, but there it was, my printed evidence, my color photographs of Discord messages, my chronological documentation of lies. Derek's face went pale. What is this? Dad asked, his fork lowering to his plate. This, I said, my hands shaking badly enough that I could see the pages trembling, is what Derek's actually been doing for the past 8 months. Hey, hold on, Derek started, standing up. No, I said, and my voice was louder now, steadier, driven by something I couldn't quite name. Anger. Righteousness. Betrayal. No, you don't get to. You don't get to sit here and lie to their faces. Not anymore. My aunt was standing now, defensive. What are you talking about? He hasn't applied for a single job, I said, opening the folder. My hands had stopped shaking. They were completely steady now. Not one. He spends his days gaming and drinking, and he mocks you guys. I looked directly at my parents, in Discord messages to his friends. He thinks you're stupid. He thinks the whole thing is hilarious. The silence that followed was absolute. Mom's face had gone white. Dad's expression was frozen somewhere between shock and confusion. Derek was already moving, reaching out like he could somehow grab the folder from me, take back his own words. You don't understand, he started. I understand perfectly, I said. And the worst part was, so did everyone else. Hashtag chunk 5. The folder felt weightless in my hands now, which was strange because moments before it had felt like holding a live grenade. I spread the pages across the table, not scattered, but deliberate. Methodical. A prosecutor laying out evidence. The first printout was a screenshot of Derek's Discord channel. The username was partially obscured but the timestamps were clear. May 15th, June 2nd. July 19th, continuous. A months-long record of him talking shit about his family while they were at work. This is insane, Derek said, his voice cracking slightly. He was still standing, looking around the table like he was waiting for someone to defend him. No one was moving. You literally stalked me. You printed out private conversations. Private conversations where you called Dad's business a boomer dinosaur, I cut in, reading directly from the page. Where you said, and I quote, they're so desperate to help, it's actually pathetic. Free room, free food, free everything, and they still think I'm going to thank them. My mom made a sound. Not quite a gasp. Something smaller and more broken. And here, I continued, because I practiced this part and I wasn't going to falter now. Here's you telling someone named Skullcrusher47 that you were playing the long game. That you were going to milk this until Christmas and then decide what you actually wanted to do. Derek's face had transformed. The humble, grateful mask had completely slipped away. Now he just looked angry. Trapped. You had no right. And the job applications? I kept going, pulling out the next set of documents. These are screenshots from your email. Sent folder. Know what's in it? Nothing. 0 legitimate job applications. But what is in there are 17 tabs open to gaming communities, Discord servers, and something called investment opportunities that looks suspiciously like a cryptocurrency scheme. Okay, that's enough, Derek's dad said, standing up now. He looked at his wife, then at my parents, then back at me like he wasn't sure if he was supposed to defend his son or strangle him. This is between Derek and... This is between Derek and the people he's been lying to while they're paying for his existence, I said, and I could hear the shake coming back into my voice now, the anger finally cracking through my performance of cold rationality. This is between Derek and the family that cleared out a room for him. That made him dinner. That stood up and toasted him like he was actually trying. Grandpa had set down his fork. He was watching me with an expression I couldn't quite read, not disapproval, but something like surprise. Like he was seeing me for the first time. You know what the worst part is? I said, and now I could feel my eyes stinging. The absolute worst part. You weren't even trying to hide it. You didn't even care enough to pretend. You just decided you didn't have to respect them. You decided their kindness was something to laugh at. I was struggling, Derek said, and his voice had changed again. This time it sounded almost pleading. You don't know what it's like. To struggle. Have you met my parents? I asked. Dad worked 70-hour weeks when the business was starting. Mom worked full-time and raised me and still managed to keep everyone fed and clothed and loved. So forgive me if I don't feel particularly sympathetic to your struggles while you're playing video games on someone else's dime. The dining room had become a completely different space. The candles were still flickering, the turkey still sat there, half-carved and glistening under the chandelier. But the carefully constructed warmth of the evening had evaporated, replaced by something raw and difficult. My aunt was crying quietly. Derek's dad looked like he was making calculations, trying to figure out what he was supposed to do or feel. But it was my mom who broke the silence. Is this true? She asked Derek, her voice small in a way I'd never heard before. All of it. Derek didn't answer immediately. He just sat back down, heavily, like someone had let the air out of him. Some of it's exaggerated, he started, but even he could hear how weak that sounded. Some of it, my dad repeated quietly. He was looking at the pages spread across the table. What part of their pathetic is exaggerated? The silence that followed was thick enough to choke on. I realized, too late, that I'd been imagining this moment wrong. In my head, Derek would try to defend himself and I would systematically dismantle his arguments. My parents would see the evidence, understand their mistake, and immediately show him the door. There would be a clean resolution. A clear ending. What I hadn't anticipated was how much pain it would cause. Not Derek's pain, I didn't care about that. But watching my mom's face crumple. Watching my dad look at the evidence of his own naivete. Watching my aunt come to terms with the fact that her son, this man she'd been hoping was getting better, getting back on track, had been lying to her face every single day. Grandpa cleared his throat. I think Derek should leave, he said. It wasn't a question. Yeah, Derek's dad said, his voice hollow. Yeah, I think we're going to go. Mom, come on, Derek tried, but his mother wasn't looking at him. She was looking at my parents, her face a mixture of shame and disappointment and anger that I realized was probably directed at herself for not seeing it sooner. As they started gathering their things, a painful, awkward process that involved Derek trying to take some of the leftover rolls with him, I felt something I hadn't expected. Guilt. Not because I'd done anything wrong. Not because I regretted exposing him. But because the consequences were real, and they rippled outward, and they weren't just affecting Derek. His mom was crying. His dad looked devastated. And my parents were sitting there with the ruins of their generosity spread out in front of them like an accusation. I'd wanted to fix things. To make my parents see the truth. I'd succeeded. And now I had no idea what was supposed to happen next. Hashtag chunk 6. The door closed behind them with a soft, final click. For a moment, nobody moved. The dining room felt cavernous now, all that wasted space where Derek had been sitting. There were still dirty plates on the table, wine glasses half full, the remnants of what was supposed to have been a pleasant evening. Grandpa reached over and blew out the candles. Well, he said quietly. That happened. Mom had her hand over her mouth. Not crying anymore, but breathing carefully, like she was trying to hold herself together through sheer force of will. Dad was staring at the folder I'd left on the table, at the scattered pages with Derek's own words printed out in black and white. His jaw was working, like he was chewing on something that wouldn't go down. I'm going to check on your mother, Grandpa said, standing up with the slow, deliberate movements of someone much older than his years. She shouldn't have had to witness that. He paused, looking at me directly. But I think you did the right thing. The hard right thing. Then he was gone, and it was just the three of us. I need to clean up, my mom said suddenly, standing up with jerky, uncoordinated movements. She started collecting plates, her hands shaking badly enough that I was worried she'd drop something. I should clean up. We have leftovers and I should. Mom, my dad said gently, reaching over and taking the plates from her hands. Sit down. She sat. She looked like she might break. The thing I hadn't accounted for, the thing nobody ever really accounts for in these kinds of situations, was the aftermath. I'd been so focused on the moment of revelation, on finally forcing my parents to see the truth, that I hadn't thought much about what came after. The exposure. The shame. The realization that they'd been fooled by someone they loved, someone they tried to help. How long have you known? Dad asked me. About 3 weeks, I admitted. I wanted to be sure before I said anything. Before I did that. 3 weeks, he repeated. He said it like he was testing out the words, trying to understand them. And you didn't tell us. There was no accusation in his voice, which somehow made it worse. It was just a fact, stated plainly, and it hung between us like an indictment. I wasn't sure you believed me, I said. Or that you'd do anything about it. I thought if I just told you, he'd deny it, and then it would be my word against his, and he'd probably just lie better next time. Mom's laugh was brittle, edged with something that sounded like hysteria. God, we're so stupid. So unbelievably stupid. You're not stupid, I said. He's your nephew. Your family. You wanted to trust him. Wanting to trust someone isn't an excuse for being blind, Dad said, and there was anger in his voice now, anger at himself, I realized. We should have questioned it. We should have asked more questions. 8 months, and we never once actually verified that he was looking for jobs. We just took his word for it. Mom had started crying again, silently, tears streaming down her face while she stared at nothing. His mother. God, his mother is going to blame herself. She should, I said, and then immediately regretted it when both my parents looked at me with shock. I mean, she should have been more skeptical too. But that's not your fault. That's not your responsibility. Isn't it? My dad asked. If we'd done something about this sooner, if we'd actually taken action instead of just believing whatever he told us, then his parents wouldn't be sitting at home right now having a terrible conversation about what went wrong with their son. I opened my mouth to argue, but I realized he was right. That was the part one hadn't thought about. Derek was a liar and a freeloader, yes, but he was also someone's child. Someone they'd presumably raised, and who disappointed them, and whose failure reflected back on them somehow. The shame didn't stop with Derek. It rippled outward to everyone who believed him, everyone who tried to help him, everyone who'd invested hope in his reformation. I'm sorry, I said. I should have told you sooner. I should have. No, Mom said suddenly, her voice sharp. No, don't apologize. You did the right thing. I don't like feeling stupid, but I like being lied to even less. And I like you more than I like pretending everything is fine when it isn't. She reached over and squeezed my hand, her grip tight enough to hurt a little. When I looked at her face, there was something fierce underneath all the sadness. Determination, maybe. Or the beginning of anger at being manipulated. We need to think about what happens next, Dad said, shifting into problem-solving mode. We need to contact Derek's parents. We need to discuss what the expectation is going forward. And we need to, he stopped, looking at me. We need to address the privacy issue. You accessed his email, his Discord. We should probably talk about what that means legally, ethically. I felt my stomach drop. I hadn't thought about that part either. I'd been so focused on the moral rightness of exposing Derek that I hadn't considered that I might have crossed some legal lines to do it. I know it was probably not, I mean, his password was written on a post-it note stuck to the desk in my room. I didn't have to hack anything. And the Discord screenshots were they were public enough that anyone could have seen them if they knew where to look. That doesn't make it better, Dad said, but he didn't sound angry. He sounded tired. It's still not great. But I think we can address the conversation at another time. Right now we need to focus on damage control and figure out what this looks like going forward. Mom was staring at the folder again, at the physical evidence of her nephew's betrayal. Do we have to tell anyone else? Grandma? Aunt Susan? The rest of the family? I think word will get out, I said carefully. Grandpa and Grandma already know. Derek's parents know. Someone's going to mention it to someone else. Dad nodded grimly. We'll control the narrative as much as we can. We'll be honest about what happened, but we'll also be clear that we've addressed it and Derek is no longer staying with us. The finality of that statement hung in the air. No longer staying with us. The bedroom upstairs, my childhood bedroom, would be empty again. Everything I'd been fighting for would be mine again. So why did I feel like I'd lost something instead? I need some air, Mom said, standing up abruptly. I'm going to go sit on the porch for a while. She left, and Dad and I sat in the ruined dining room, surrounded by the debris of what was supposed to have been a perfect family dinner, and I realized that there were no clean resolutions. No neat endings. Just the complicated, painful work of dealing with the consequences of the truth. #Chunk7. The house felt different after that night. Smaller somehow, despite having my bedroom back, or maybe because of it. Derek had left within 2 days, taking only what he'd come with, leaving behind beer cans he'd hidden under the bed and gaming equipment he apparently didn't care enough about to retrieve. My parents boxed it all up and stored it in the garage without comment. We didn't talk about Derek much after he left, which somehow made the whole thing feel worse. It was like everyone was pretending it hadn't happened, which meant everyone was also pretending that nothing had changed, and that was obviously a lie. The fallout started small and then mushroomed. Aunt Susan, Derek's mom, called on day 3. I wasn't in the room for the conversation, but I could hear my mom's voice getting progressively higher and more strained through the closed kitchen door. When she hung up, she looked like she'd aged 5 years. Apparently, Aunt Susan had decided that the family dinner confrontation was unnecessarily cruel, and that Derek deserved a chance to explain himself. Never mind that he'd already been given multiple chances. Never mind that his explanation was going to be the same lie he'd been telling for 8 months. She thinks we ambushed him, Mom said, sitting down heavily at the kitchen table. She thinks we should have spoken to him privately first, given him a chance to come clean on his own terms. Would he have? I asked. No, Dad said, coming in from the living room. Absolutely not. He would have denied everything and then probably moved on to scamming someone else. But even as he said it, I could see the doubt in his face. The part of him that was wondering if he could have handled it differently. If we could have all handled it differently. The family group chat exploded on day 5. Someone, I'm still not entirely sure who, had posted about the incident at dinner, and suddenly everyone had opinions. Some people sided with my parents, praising their honesty and courage. Others thought we'd been too harsh, too public, too humiliating. A few actually defended Derek outright, suggesting that maybe he'd been struggling with depression or some other undiagnosed issue that excused the lying and the mooching. Grandpa posted a lengthy message that basically said, Derek is a grown man who chose to be dishonest. The consequences are his responsibility, and I loved him for it, but it also seemed to make things worse because it forced everyone to take a side more explicitly. My parents stopped going to extended family events. Nothing was said about it directly, they just started declining invitations with increasingly vague excuses. I could tell it bothered my dad more than my mom. He'd always been close with Grandpa, and he valued having the extended family connections. Watching him retreat from all of that felt like a secondary punishment, like Derek's lies were still doing damage even after Derek was gone. But the weirdest part was when Derek's dad called. I answered the phone by accident. I thought it was my friend Marcus, and Uncle Robert sounded exhausted in a way that made me feel immediately guilty. I wanted to talk to your parents, he said carefully, but I also wanted to say something to you, if that's okay. I called for my dad, but I listened from the kitchen anyway. Uncle Robert was apologizing. Not making excuses, not defending Derek, but actually apologizing for raising a son who would betray my parents' kindness. He said Derek was staying with them now, and they were thinking about getting him into therapy, and he paid my parents back for the 8 months of rent and food immediately, without being asked. I'm ashamed, Uncle Robert said, and I could hear it in his voice, a bone-deep shame that made me feel sick. I should have taught him better. I should have known he was capable of this. And that was the thing nobody prepared you for, the fact that exposing someone's lies doesn't just hurt the liar. It spreads out like poison through the whole family tree. It made me realize that Derek's parents had failed too, in some way, and that my parents had failed by not watching him closely enough, and that I'd maybe been too righteous in my certainty that the truth needed to come out the way it did. The hardest part came about 2 weeks in, when I was standing in my childhood bedroom, finally mine again, and realized I couldn't enjoy it. It was supposed to feel like victory. I'd fought for this space. I'd won. But instead, it just felt empty and somehow disappointing, like the prize wasn't worth what it had cost. Mom found me sitting on the edge of the bed, apparently looking pathetic enough to warrant concern. You okay? She asked, sitting down next to me. Did we do the right thing? I asked. It was a stupid question. I'd already asked it 1,000 times. But I needed to hear it again, or maybe I needed to hear it differently. Yes, Mom said immediately. But that doesn't mean it was painless. There's a difference between doing the right thing and doing the thing that feels good. Sometimes the right thing is messy and complicated and makes everyone sad for a while. Derek's dad sounds depressed when he talks to Dad, I said. He's processing the fact that his son has serious problems, Mom said. That's appropriate. He should be depressed. So should Aunt Susan, frankly, though I think she's still in denial. She paused. That's not our responsibility to fix, though. We did what we needed to do for our family. What they do now is up to them. But I was starting to understand that there wasn't really a point where you got to be done with consequences. There wasn't a finish line where everyone learned their lessons and moved on and everything was better. There was just this. The ongoing work of living with the choices you'd made, of watching other people struggle with the fallout, of sitting in your reclaimed bedroom and wondering if victory and regret were always going to feel this similar. I thought about Derek out there somewhere, probably still angry, probably still telling himself his own version of the story. And I thought about Uncle Robert apologizing to my dad. And I thought about my mom crying at the dinner table. And I realized that the story wasn't actually over. It was just changing shape, becoming something different and probably more complicated than anything I'd anticipated when I printed out those screenshots. #Chunk8. 3 months later, I got a text from Derek. I didn't recognize the number at first. When I opened it, my stomach did a weird flip, *, can we talk? Not to argue. I just need to say some things. *. My first instinct was to delete it. To block the number and pretend it had never arrived. But I'd spent the last 3 months thinking about Derek constantly, and I was tired of carrying that weight around. So I texted back a time and place, a coffee shop halfway between our houses, neutral territory, public enough that I felt safe but private enough to actually have a conversation. He looked different when he showed up. Smaller, maybe. Or just less confident than he'd been that night at dinner. He was also sober, which was noticeable in the way he moved, the way his eyes focused. He ordered black coffee and sat across from me without asking if I wanted anything, which felt appropriately careful. I've been in therapy, he said immediately. Started about a month ago. My dad insisted, and I was angry about it, but... He trailed off, staring into his coffee cup. I was an asshole. It wasn't a grand apology. It wasn't particularly eloquent. But it was so undefended, so completely lacking in the manipulative charm he tried to deploy at the family dinner, that I didn't know how to respond. I lied because I was embarrassed, he continued. And then I kept lying because admitting the truth felt worse than just perpetuating the lie. And I convinced myself that your parents owed me, somehow. That asking for help was the same as getting something I deserved. My therapist has spent the last month explaining why that's not how any of this works. Okay, I said slowly. Your parents, Derek said, looking up at me finally, were incredibly kind to me. Better to me than I probably deserved. And I repaid that by mocking them and lying to them and basically living a double life in their house like they were idiots. When I think about how disrespectful that was. He shook his head. I can't really get over it. I found myself believing him. Not because people can't lie convincingly in therapy, obviously they can, but because Derek seemed genuinely disgusted with himself, and that wasn't something you could really fake for very long. Did you come here to make me feel better about what I did? I asked. Because I'm not sure I need permission to have been right. No, Derek said. I came here because I owe you an apology too. Not just for lying, but for making you the person who had to expose me. You were living in a closet because I was being a parasite in your room. You had to gather evidence and plan an intervention because your parents were too kind to kick me out themselves. That put you in a bad position, and I did that. We sat in silence for a while. The coffee shop hummed around us, espresso machines steaming, baristas calling out orders, the ambient noise of other people living their normal, uncomplicated lives. Are you okay now? I asked finally. Not really, Derek said. I'm working on it, though. I found a job, actual job hunting, not fake applications. It's not impressive, just warehouse work, but I'm doing it, and I'm saving money. Dad's given me a timeline for moving out, and I'm going to meet it. I'm not going to be a disaster in their house, and I'm definitely not going to be anyone else's problem ever again. That's good, I said, and I meant it. Your parents, Derek said, told my dad that they forgive me. They didn't have to say that. They probably didn't even mean it fully yet. But they said it anyway, and that. He stopped, collecting himself. That made me understand how much I fucked up. Because they're better people than I am, and I prayed on that. After Derek left, I sat in the coffee shop for another hour, turning over the conversation in my mind. It wasn't a neat resolution. Derek was still going to have to figure his life out. My family was still awkward with some of the extended family. My parents still hadn't fully reconciled with Aunt Susan. But something had shifted. When I got home, I found my mom in the kitchen making dinner, actually cooking, not the quick stuff we'd been subsisting on since everything fell apart. The house smelled like garlic and something simmering, something that suggested she'd returned to the idea that meals could be deliberate and nourishing rather than just functional. How was your day? She asked, and I realized I hadn't told her about the coffee shop meeting because I wasn't sure how she'd react. I met with Derek, I said. She froze, wooden spoon halfway to her mouth. It was okay, I continued. Actually, it was. I think he's doing better. He's in therapy, he's got a job. He apologized. For real, not like a manipulation thing. My mom set down the spoon and turned to face me fully. How do you feel about that? Honest? I said, sitting down at the kitchen table where so much of this story had unfolded. I feel like maybe I can stop being angry now. I feel like maybe I don't need to be right about this anymore. That's mature, Mom said, and she meant it without any sarcasm. It's not really, I said. It's just exhausting to hold on to. That weekend, my dad came into my room while I was organizing my books, something I'd been avoiding because the room still felt strange, like a prize I didn't quite know how to claim. Your mom told me about the coffee meeting, he said. Derek's really trying. Yeah, I said. I think so. Dad sat on the edge of my bed, in that same spot where Mom had asked me if we'd done the right thing. I talked to Robert the other day. Derek's on track. He's going to move out in a few months. And Robert wanted you to know, Dad paused, choosing his words carefully, that he thinks what you did took courage. He doesn't hold it against you. He understands why it needed to happen. He said that? I asked. He did. And I want you to know that I understand it too. I wasn't sure for a while. I second-guessed myself a lot. But Derek needed a wake-up call, and your mom and I needed to stop enabling him. You saw that clearly, and you acted on it, even though it was messy. It was more than messy, I said. It hurt people. Sometimes the truth does, Dad said. But the alternative was letting Derek keep lying, letting him keep disrespecting your mom and me, letting him take up space that didn't belong to him. You chose truth over comfort. That matters. After he left, I looked around my room, really looked at it. The space was mine again. The victory was real. And for the first time since the family dinner, it didn't feel empty. It felt like home.